friends, and welcome to our second video feature on the great big Canadian election of 2019. So this election, like most elections, is about a lot of very important issues like jobs and taxes and healthcare and foreign policy and climate change. And in the future, I will do a video talking about those debates in more detail. But today, I want to talk about the degree that this is an election about leadership. Specifically, the leadership of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of the Liberal Party, who has been running Canada for the last 4 years and is now seeking a second term. So here is an old Canadian joke. There are two kinds of Canadian prime ministers. The ones no one has ever heard of, and Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is obviously one of the most famous world leaders in the universe these days, but that celebrity status cuts both ways. Some Canadians find Justin Trudeau this very uplifting, inspirational figure, while others find him this incredibly grating, obnoxious character. Either way, he is easily one of the most polarizing leaders that this country has ever produced. His supporters will say that Prime Minister Trudeau has presided over a broadly good economy and has spent a lot of time pushing progressive policies that promote an image of Canada as this very tolerant, inclusive, united country, which is very flattering at a time when many other countries of this world seem to be racked by racial division and political turmoil. Trudeau similarly never misses an opportunity to say good things about women and immigrants and ethnic minorities and Native Canadians and the LGBT community. The fact that his hyper-tolerant persona contrasts so sharply with that of President Trump is considered a particular asset, given how much Canadians like to play this game of compare and contrast with the US. On the other hand, Trudeau's critics tend to see him as this very vain and cringy character, obsessed with his international image and personal popularity at the expense of literally everything else. There's also definitely a sense that Trudeau is most interested in being a prime minister for like woke urban people in Toronto and Montreal, and much less so for like working class people in rural parts of the country. This tension is particularly felt among the many Canadians who work in Canada's large and important oil industry, many of whom feel that Trudeau has sold them out so he can virtue signal on the environment. As the wealthy son of a former prime minister, there is also this sense that Trudeau is kind of this spoiled rich kid who is just sort of playing politics and doesn't really know what he's doing. The SNC-Lavalin scandal, the fact that Canada has racked up enormous budget deficits, and the more recent blackface scandal have all been cited as evidence that Justin Trudeau is a man with terrible instincts for everything beyond making himself the center of attention. Now, Trudeau has several people running against him, and it is sometimes a little bit difficult to tell how many of them should be taken seriously as legit candidates for the prime ministership. The Canadian party system is in a bit of flux right now, and some of the serious Canadian political pundits are telling us that our traditional notions of which parties matter and which ones don't might get shaken up a bit in this election. But basically, we could say that Trudeau's Liberal Party faces two major competitors, two minor competitors, and one kind of weird Quebec party that's sort of in the middle. But anyway, everybody seems to agree that Trudeau's main opponent in this election is the leader of the Conservative Party, Andrew Scheer. So I would say Andrew Scheer is a man who is quite happy for this election to just be a big referendum on Justin Trudeau's leadership, given that he is running quite a passive campaign. Scheer is a former Speaker of the Canadian Parliament, which in the Canadian system is a pretty low-key job, and Andrew Scheer has a pretty low-key personality to match. More than anything else, I think he just wants to be seen as a calm and competent guy who can easily step in and take charge once voters get sick of Justin Trudeau's antics. A lot of his marketing leans very heavily into this idea that he's just an ordinary middle-class dad with a family just like yours who's just trying to help you get ahead.
It's time for you to get ahead.
It's time for you to get ahead.
It's time for you to get ahead.
But you know, there are dangers that come with being too passive too. People either think you're boring and don't really stand for anything, or they think you've got some hidden agenda that you're trying to fool them into supporting. Now, much like in America, Canadian conservatives tend to be disproportionately religious folk, usually evangelical Protestants or conservative Catholics. But unlike in America, the policy influences of the Christian right faction of the Conservative Party have traditionally been held down down by the more secular wing of the party, which has historically been more powerful. This is a delicate setup, and I would say there have been growing tensions between the religious and secular factions of the Conservative Party for a while now. Scheer is kind of a bridge figure, because even though he says that he's committed to the secular agenda, he is personally quite religious and has a lot of connections to that side of the party. So among people who don't like the Conservative Party, like, say, Justin Trudeau, it has become very popular to portray Scheer as like a kind of sleeper agent of the Christian right, someone who's just like super eager to ratchet back LGBT rights and legal abortion once he gets into power. The Liberals have been constantly circulating this clip of Scheer from 2005, in which he makes a passionate argument against gay marriage as proof of his real agenda.
There's nothing more important to society than the raising of children, for its very survival requires it. Homosexual unions are by nature contradictory to this. There is no complementarity of the sexes.
Now, the Liberals always campaign against Conservatives this way, but you could say with someone like Scheer, he is perhaps a little bit closer to the actual stereotype. Alright, then there is candidate number 3, Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party. Jagmeet Singh is obviously the most interesting guy running for Prime Minister because, you know, you can see he's the son of Indian immigrants and he's a member of the Sikh religion, so he has a big beard and turban. And yet, at the same time, Singh also really portrays himself as like this super assimilated hipster kind of guy who is not very stereotypically Indian at all. His favorite things in the world, his marketing team would like you to know, are MMA, basketball, and bespoke suits. Now, there's obviously a lot of worry that Canada is not ready for someone as different as Singh to become Prime Minister, which is basically just the euphemistic way that journalists say the country is too racist. In Quebec in particular, there's a strong sense that French-Canadian voters will not vote for somebody that looks like Singh, which has led to Singh's party to wage this whole sort of charm offensive in an effort to sort of appease the anxieties of French voters.
Je ne suis pas comme les autres. Comme vous, mon identité, c'est ma fierté.
Because Singh's image is so unconventional for a Canadian politician, it sometimes threatens to overshadow everything else about him, which may or may not actually be a good or bad thing. As the head of the NDP, Singh is the leader of the party that is supposed to be for voters to the left of Justin Trudeau. Now, some people might reply, well, I thought Justin Trudeau was pretty far to the left already, and this is actually a bit of a problem for the NDP. Like, where exactly does Singh draw his distinctions? While they might have some small differences on policy issues, Singh's main pitch is just that he is a more principled and passionate man than Trudeau, someone less inclined to compromise when the going gets tough or surrender when special interests stand in the way.
I don't work for the wealthy and well-connected. Not just saying the right things, but actually doing them. Now that's different.
This is very typically NDP as well, you know, really focusing laser-like on every time the Liberals commit some left-wing heresy and then going, aha, you see, this is what you get with those phony baloney sellout Liberals in charge. Now, is this compelling? I don't know. The traditional charge against the NDP is that their leaders are very dogmatic and sanctimonious, and I think that's a fair charge to level against Singh in particular. But you know, being a little bit dogmatic can also help reinforce that narrative I was talking about earlier. This idea that Justin Trudeau is ultimately this fundamentally unserious person who is much more concerned with looking good than doing good. And talking of looking good, before we go any further, let us now hear a word from today's video sponsor, everybody's favorite mail-order razor company, Dollar Shave Club. Now, I remember when Prime Minister Trudeau's official portrait was released a while back, there was some minor controversy because it was very obvious that he had not shaved that day. But I could sympathize because I personally find shaving to be a bit annoying and often put it off for much longer than I should, as anyone who has watched one of my travel videos will know. But good old Dollar Shave Club has put those days behind me because this razor of theirs, this 6-blade number with the nice metal handle, is honestly the best razor I've ever used. It is so sharp and so smooth, it reminds me of like using an eraser, like just. And when you order their special shave starter set, look at all this stuff they give you. You get the razor and 4 replacement cartridges, this nice face scrub with the little gritty bits in it, you know the kind I mean. This shave butter, which probably had something to do with the closeness of the shave as well. And this post-shaving balm, which is personally something that I really hate shaving without using, so I'm very glad they included this. So the way it works is that the Dollar Shave Club people will mail you a box of shaving stuff every month, depending on your specifications. You can sign up using the link in the thing below and get your first box for only $9. Because at Dollar Shave Club, they pass the shavings on to you. Anyway, let us now look at the next candidate, the decidedly unshaven leader of the Bloc Québécois party, Yves-François Blanchet. Now, the Bloc Québécois is a party that English-speaking Canadians do not really think much about, even though it has consistently been the third or fourth place party in the Canadian Parliament for close to 30 years now. This is because the Bloc is a protest party, kind of like the radical Irish separatists in the UK, or those Arab parties in Israel. It's the party you're supposed to vote for if you're a Quebec nationalist who doesn't view the Canadian federal government as legitimate. Or at least that's the theory. In practice, I think a lot of people would say that the Bloc Québécois has mellowed out a fair bit, and it's now really more of just a kind of niche Quebec interests party. Anyway, for the last 15 years, the leader of the Bloc Québécois was a guy called Gilles Duceppe, and in the aftermath of his resignation following the 2015 election, the party has struggled hard to find a permanent replacement for him. They literally went through 4 leaders in 4 years before settling on Monsieur Blanchet last January. From 2012 to 2014, he served as a cabinet minister in the provincial government of Quebec. Beyond that, however, I would say he is entirely unknown outside of his own province, which is probably just the way he likes it. The Bloc has not done very well in the last 2 Canadian elections, and I would say expectations are probably pretty low for them in this one too. However, Quebec voters are also famously some of the most erratic in Canada, prone to big switches in party preference without much notice. There is some thinking that because Blanchet is the first new leader that the Bloc Québécois party has had in ages, that might inspire some Quebec voters to give it a second look. People sometimes ask me what would happen if the Bloc actually won the election. The short answer is they can't. It's mathematically impossible because they only run candidates in Quebec. Well, actually, I guess that's not true. It could, in theory, be possible under like really extremely weird circumstances. They would basically have to win every single seat in Quebec, and then there would have to be at least 4 other parties in the parliament splitting all of the remaining seats equally among themselves. That would give the Bloc an incredibly narrow plurality, which would be enough to make Blanchet prime minister. But the odds of that happening are probably like several billion to 1, so don't hold your breath. And lastly, let us talk about Canada's 2 small fringe parties that are kind of a wild card. The Green Party of Elizabeth May and the People's Party of Maxime Bernier. The Greens are basically a far-left populist party to the left of both Trudeau and the NDP, but stylistically as much as anything else. By this I mean that because they are so small and such outsiders, it is very easy for them to posture as the most purely committed progressive party that has had to compromise the least in their values. So much of the Greens' image revolves around their leader, Elizabeth May, who has been head of the party for 13 years now. And before she came along, the Greens were like, you know, completely on like the extreme fringe of Canadian politics. Whereas now they have 2 whole seats in Parliament. And in the last election, they won an impressive 3% of the vote. Elizabeth May is relatively popular at a personal level because she comes off as very genuine and earnest. I personally can't stand her, but I'm trying to be neutral here. She's also a very media-savvy woman, very good at getting attention for herself and her party, much more so, I would argue, than her numbers justify. As a result, the Canadian press has presented almost every single election of the last decade or so as one where Elizabeth May very well surprise us all and finally make a big breakthrough. But Elizabeth May also does have a tendency to put her foot in her mouth and reinforce the idea that the Green Party is not quite ready for prime time yet. And what this means is that even though the Green Party tends to poll quite well during election campaigns, on voting day, voters on the left tend to ultimately break for the Liberals or the NDP. And then there is Maxime Bernier, head of the People's Party. The People's Party is a brand new party that Bernier created completely from scratch in 2018, shortly after Andrew Scheer beat him in the election for leader of the Conservative Party. Its only member of parliament is Bernier himself. Back when he was still a Conservative, Bernier was considered one of the most eccentric members of his party, and one of the most libertarian members as well. It is very rare for someone as aggressively French-Canadian as Bernier to be a Conservative. let alone a libertarian conservative. So he was always considered this kind of fascinating and compelling character. Since founding the People's Party, however, Bernier has made quite a shift and is now trying to market himself as a kind of right-wing nationalist populist of the sort you see in a lot of countries these days.
We need to have fewer immigrants, but we need to be sure that these people would be able to integrate our society, to be part of our society.
He's running as a sort of right-wing version of the Greens, someone whose outsider status is supposed to serve as proof that he's actually far more committed to principle than the others. Now, Bernier seems to have attracted a lot of attention from the so-called extremely online set, who I'm sure will post lots of interesting things in the comments of this video. Because he's seen as the anti-immigration, anti-feminist, anti-political correctness candidate, he's been able to pull in a lot of support from the sorts of people who are like the real hardcore Donald Trump supporters on 4chan or whatever. But even though these people are very loud online, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to suggest that Bernier is going to be able to pull in that much support on voting day. Polls generally show him in a pretty distant 6th place. A lot of this comes down to the fact that conservative voters in this country really hate Justin Trudeau and are just going to vote for whoever they think is the man most strategically well positioned to replace him. Even if Scheer is maybe not the most passionate candidate, he's the guy that is in the best position to get Trudeau out. But you know, maybe things will change in the coming weeks. For you see, on October 7th and 10th, Canada is going to have its first ever 6-way prime ministerial debate, featuring every one of the wacky characters we've been talking about today. Expectations will be very high for everyone, since this will be the very first time all of these various party leaders will be able to confront Prime Minister Trudeau directly, as well as each other. That last point is very important because Canada tends to have very zero-sum politics. The success of one party tends to directly correlate with the failure of whatever party it most closely resembles. So in other words, Scheer and Bernier not only have to be more popular than the left-wing parties, but also each other. And May and Singh not only have to be more popular than Trudeau, but each other as well. And Blanchet basically has to be more popular than everyone, at least in Quebec. So who do you think are going to wind up the biggest winners and losers of this election? Not just in terms of who is going to wind up elected prime minister or not, but who is going to come out of this election more respected and powerful versus who is going to wind up on the ash heap of Canadian political history. Let me know in the comments. And if you have any other ideas for future election-themed videos you'd like to see me make, let me know as well. But hurry, there are only 3 weeks left. Thanks again to Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring this video, and I will see you all next week.